going to start with Kat Torre, who is the brand strategist for millionaire listing agent Ryan Serhant. We're going to kick that off starting about brand differentiation, because if we're going to put ourselves out there in terms of marketing, social media, and everything else, how do you make yourself not sound like everybody else? You all look the same. Good morning, Kat. You are off mute
Morning.
now, so it's going to be fast and furious. I'll give you a little bit of extra time. So I met Kat for the first time at Arjun's LFG Energy event, which I've spoken to a lot of people at, and loved her presentation. But I just love what you're about and what you help people about. And for someone like Ryan Serhant to say, not only do I like what you do, Kat, but I'm going to put you on salary because I'm not going to let you go. But there's probably a lot we can talk about when it comes to your history, but I really want to talk about brand strategy, why it's important to create a brand, and why we need our own personal brand to differentiate ourselves. Because when I go on social media now, I'm starting to see more and more originators get on social media, and that's a good thing. But it's also a bad thing because everybody looks the same. Honestly, if I close my eyes, it's a bunch of originators educating on a bunch of origination stuff, and I can't tell who's who. And if I'm a consumer, and if I'm a real estate agent, how do I really differentiate? And how do I determine how do I differentiate? Do I go off of my personal interest? Do I go off of my personality? Do I go off of my niche? Like, what do I do? And so that's kind of where we're going to start, right, Kat? And
Yeah.
so just kind of to kick it off, tell us about, I guess tell us how you got started with brand, but why it's important, and how you've worked with people, and really, where do we start with that, right?
Yeah. Super easy question to kick off
I
the
know. I
mega
like to do,
quarter
everybody
question
that knows
section
me,
here.
I like to throw the kitchen sink at everybody, right?
Yeah. Let's do it. So, well, I'll answer the last question that you asked, how I got started, right? So I cut my teeth in the marketing world, working for and with local businesses, local startups to create more awareness, drive leads for their business. But over time, what I realized was you could have all of the best marketing strategies, all of the best support, but if you don't have a solid understanding of your brand, all you're doing is putting band-aids on the symptoms and not addressing the root cause of what is really holding you back from being able to scale. And I'll use one of my favorite analogies. I recently moved from Florida. I know we have a lot of West Coast audience, so I'll use like earthquakes, hurricanes, natural disasters as an example here. Would you rather be, as a homeowner, the homeowner who purchases earthquake insurance or purchases hurricane or flood insurance? Or would you rather be the homeowner that waits for the earthquake to hit or the hurricane to flood your home or rip off your roof before you actually try to solve the problem? And I share this analogy because it's a difference between being proactive in your business and being reactive and at the mercy of the market and at the mercy of the economy. There's so much that's out of our control that we should not try to control, because that's the definition of insanity. But what is within your control is how people perceive you, how you want to be known, how you want to be described, your personality, your values, your vibe, that thing, that X factor that will really allow you to be seen as different and to stand out and to cut through all of the noise that's out there. And so why branding? Because it's proactive and it puts you in the driver's seat of your own destiny rather than just being like stuck in the passenger seat or their back seat and being whiplashed around by whatever else is going on. Does that make sense?
I just want to show someone who's really good at branding, because whenever I mention Denise Donahue, and a lot of you know her because she's a collaborator with our company,
Mm-hmm.
she's known as the mortgage nerd. And whenever I talk to people and I say, do you know Denise Donahue? They're like, who? And I say, the mortgage nerd. And I'm like, yeah, I know the mortgage nerd. So that's her brand. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
a name, but it represents her personality, because she literally nerds out with things, and she always wears her glasses, and
Mm-hmm.
it makes her extremely recognizable. So in a world of loan officer this and Denise this and this person's that, who's that person? But the mortgage nerd is her brand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how she came up with it, I have no idea, right? But I guess that's the question, is like, what is that like, how do we determine our brand, and where do we go? Do we pick personality? Somebody asked me a question the other day, actually asked me for the first time. They said, besides actually what you do and what you teach, what is unique about you? So he was
Mm-hmm.
actually asking me my brand question, and I really had to think about it. And I said, you know what? I think what I represent innovation and change. And I think people work with me because they they want to change or they want to innovate. And so compared to other coaches. And so then I had to sit back and look at it and says, okay, so how does my brand strategy actually reflect that? Because I never thought about branding myself more that way. I mean, I talk
Hmm.
about it a lot, but I haven't gone like the full distance, right?
Hmm.
So that was an interesting question. So how do people determine their brand? I mean, in a world of loan officers, they're sitting there going, I don't know, what do I choose? Do I say I'm VA because that's my brand? And that's another issue. There's a lot of people that are VA. They say, oh, I'm going to be VA, but then you
Hmm.
have an issue. You got 300 people being veteran assistants, right? Or is it about
Right.
personality? Like what's the formula?
So here's the secret that probably a lot of brand consultants and strategists won't tell you because
Mhm.
they want your money and they want to work with you immediately, right? Branding is an inside job first. You got to go inward. You got to really ask yourself, what are the intrinsic internal characteristics? What are your personality traits? What are your values? How has your story shaped who you are and given you a unique flavor and perspective and framework or process for solving a problem? Because there's a million ways to make money online, just like there's a million ways to get approved for a mortgage. But
Mhm.
you, based on your background, your story, have a unique way to go about it just because of your simple life experiences. And so I would say really think about, like, to use Denise as an example, the mortgage nerd, figure out what can be your 2 or 3 word brand that represents you, that is reflective of your background. So my 2 word brand is brand architect. That is my company, The Brand Architect LLC. Brand because I want to be at the inception of it all. I want to be proactive. I want to be in control of my destiny. And architect because I love to build with intention. So this was an analogy I think I used at the LFG Energy event. You can tell I love analogies here to demonstrate brand, right? Because it's so nebulous for people who aren't as familiar with it. But I see people out there trying to produce content and trying to launch podcasts and do all these things. And it's the equivalent of, let's say you want to go to Wayfair or Crate and Barrel and decorate the home before you've even laid the concrete foundation of your brand house. And your identity, your 2 word brand, your positioning, your mission, the vision you have, that's the invisible inside stuff that people often skip over. And yet they wonder why their brand feels hollow and there's crickets in their DMs, or it doesn't
Mhm.
feel like it's a stable place to say, hey, Kai, you feel stable, you feel like you know your stuff, you're confident. I'm going to trust you with my hundreds of thousands of hard-earned dollars to see me through this journey on the other side. But it's
Yeah.
that inside job first and figuring out what that is. And if you guys are taking notes, or I know that this is recorded, that the place to begin really is to truly understand what you stand for, because that will infuse your content with energy and passion, and it will also be a filter with which people can use to decide if they actually want to do business with you. So Kai, you
And I
mentioned,
and I think it's fair to say that most people that are on this call, they've been in the industry for a while. And so I think it's fair to say, without having to overthink it, ask yourself this question. Why do you think the people that have worked with you work with you? What is
mhm,
it about your personality? What is it about your style? What is
mhm,
it about what you represent that attracted those people to you and those people wanted to work with you?
mhm,
So that way you can just look at history instead of trying to figure it out, right? And I've actually asked a few people that question, and some people have said, you know what, I'm very truthful. I'm one to say, well, let me tell you how it is, right? So
mhm,
her brand was truth, right? Pulling the curtain over, like the inside scoop, secrets. And then I asked
mhm,
somebody else, they said, I think it's because I'm very empathetic and I listen to people. And I said, oh, and we talked about this. I said, so you're like the mom of mortgages, right? And so
mm,
Denise, it's like, well, because I'm very technical. And I know one of my other coaches, he says, because she says, I'm like the knowledge base for everything. I just know everything. So her brand is like knowledge, right?
mhm.
And I think that's the question that people could easily ask. And so everybody put in the chat, why do why do people work with you, right? What value or personality or connection do you create with people? And I think that's a good starting point, right?
It is because, and I think I want to double down on what you said about personality, because, like you said, more and more originators are getting online. They're attempting to build their brands on social, on digital, which is the way to go because it's an amazing form of leverage so that you can scale sans burnout. But they are, And this is probably the fear that underlies a lot of the clients, the hundreds, if not thousands of clients that I have worked with, is that when you do lead with your personality, you lead with your story, you're being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that's a little unsettling at first. That can make you feel a little uncomfortable because, yes, you are putting yourself out there. And when you're authentic, you're going to be able to find the people that want to work with you, that vibe with you, that will choose you over the other originator simply for the fact that it's a more pleasurable doing business with you, or because you both went to the same college, or
Yeah.
because your kids play the same sports, or because you guys have very similar passions outside of your paycheck. Branding is so powerful because it's not rooted in fact or logic. And contrary to, I think, what a lot of people think, we're not logical human beings. We like to
Right.
think that we are, but really we're emotional human
Mhm.
beings. And when you infuse your brand with your personality and your passions and your energy, you A, set yourself apart from the competition because nobody has your DNA or your unique story. And so you're leaving your greatest asset on the table by not putting yourself out there and being unique. And then B, you're building relationships. And
Right.
by building relationships, you'll have trust. And if you have trust, you'll have business. That's the order of operations. And so I've
Absolutely.
been seeing a
There
lot of
was
great comments here too.
I've been on social for a while, and it's not really until maybe the last 2 years that I actually started talking about business. For years and years
Mm-hmm.
and years, I never posted about business, yet I got 100% of my, well, not 100, maybe 80% of my business from social. I would just post about my life, my kids, sports. Everybody knows me as a jokester. I'm not afraid to cross the gray line when it comes to being politically incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always my brand. And then it was interesting that when people would want to work with me, I think they gravitated toward that style, that personality. And it wasn't, and
Mm-hmm.
I would talk about business because they would see me speak, but I think the brand really connected with people. So I'm seeing a lot of people write that they're good with, let's say, education or teaching. And that is maybe what you do, but ask yourself a different question. How do you deliver that, though? How do you deliver
Mm-hmm.
education? Do you deliver it with empathy? Do you deliver it with hard truth? Do you deliver it with charts and numbers? Do you deliver it with technology? So I think we have to get a little bit deeper into those things. We can't just say, well, I'm good at education, I'm good at helping people, because like that's what coaches do. But like, what's the difference between me and the other coaches, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think everybody here knows my personality. I'm very direct, straight to the point, but but I also challenge. I challenge the status quo, and I'm about
Mm-hmm.
transition and change and innovation, right?
Well, and let me also like let everybody in on a little bit of a secret here. Kai, when you and I connected at LFG Energy, so the workshop that I did when I was speaking, I used myself as an example when I was demonstrating how to develop your brand pitch, right? It was a 3-question formula. It can be the foundation of your intro, of your newsletter, of your LinkedIn post, your social, all of that, right? And the one thing that I did was I used an example of I am a Japanese American.
Right.
And I am. And that might actually come as a surprise to you, although we're in America, so maybe not. But my mother is half Japanese, half Irish. She was born in Tokyo and she's a military brat. And so she was raised throughout the States. And I can't tell you, Kai, when you came up, you're my people. Like, and if I had not led with that cultural heritage, that element of my background of that's an an unequivocal part of my branding, we would have not had that emotional kind of connection
Right.
of having that shared background. And then of course we got to talking and you're incredible at what you do and I love what I do too. So like that made sense. But what sparked the conversation was that common ground. And imagine if I had never even revealed that aspect about my background, you would have not known. You would have had to do some research and do some digging, but I led with it. And several people came up to me after that workshop and they were like, "Thank you for saying that. I would have had no idea. It's so nice to see
Yeah.
representation."
You
Like,
would have just been another brand strategist. I don't know
exactly.
that I would have wanted to talk to you, but the
Hmm.
reality is that a lot of times in business, I wanted to meet you anyways because you had a great presentation, and I knew, Arjun has spoken very highly of you.
Hmm.
But that's not why I wanted to talk to you. I wanted to talk to you just because I said, hey, you're just one of my people, which is
Hmm.
sort of like half white, half Asian. And
Yes,
we just
Papa.
and we probably talked about that for almost 20 minutes.
We did.
But that connected us. And then we transitioned into business, right? So
Hmm.
everybody that's on this call, ask yourself, how often have you connected with somebody first on a personal level, on a connection level, before you even start about business? And then when you talk about business, do you feel like you've now created the connection and the rapport without it?
Hmm.
Somebody asked me a question the other day. We've been doing this for the past 3 months or so. I've been forcing people to reach out to their database and reconnect with their past clients. I mean, people have been in this business for 10, 15 years. And
Hmm.
somebody said the other day, they said, what if it feels awkward reaching out to somebody? And I
Mm.
said, what's interesting is that I don't think it's a matter of what you say. The question is, how did you connect with them when you first met them?
Hmm.
Because if your interaction with them 4 years ago was just very transactional loans, then there wasn't a deep connection.
Hmm.
But if you're the girl that we talked about your Japanese heritage, if I called you, you'd be like, "Hey, my Asian brother, what's going on?" Right? Like we would
Yeah.
lead the conversation with that.
Yeah.
And so here's a question that I think, and this was asked at the event too. I think sometimes people are afraid that if they niche their brand or if they niche their market, they're going to alienate other
Mm.
people in other markets. Like, am I going to alienate people that, let's say, don't like golf, even though I talk about golf so much, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's always a fear. What's your opinion on that? What's your take on that?
So my take is that it is definitely a fear, but it's also a myth, which
Mhm.
is great news because the primary goal of social, the primary goal of community, the primary goal of any method of communication is to connect with another human being. You're not creating content for the platform, you're creating content for that person on the other side of the phone screen that's really, really struggling, and you've got the solution to solve their problem. And so I think when you are speaking as if you're speaking to one specific person, the right people are going to feel like you're in their head. You read their minds, you understand their fears, and you can be their shepherd and their guide on their journey. And they're going to go with you because they feel like you're speaking directly to them. It's so personalized and it's so magnetic.
Right.
And let me tell you, if you're trying to pander to everybody, if you're trying to speak to everybody, it's going to be like going a mile wide and an inch deep, and it's not going to make an impact. It's not going to have any traction. It's going to feel, and this came up when we were recording a guest for our podcast, Not Nice Clever. We asked them, what's your favorite non-curse word, one word insult? And the guest, Tiffany Pentozzi, she's like, I hate the word generic. And I'm like, yeah, I don't ever want to be described as generic. And I don't think anybody on this call does either, because then that means you're just going to get lost in that sea of noise. And I'm glad that you brought up the language, right? Of going deeper of how you do business, right? What's your specific vibe? Because this was brought up. We actually had the pleasure of interviewing Chris Doe on our podcast a couple weeks ago. And he
Yeah.
said, the more you lean into your unique heritage, your unique language, and you can get other people to speak your language too. It's just such a powerful way to strengthen those relationships, to build community, and then that matriculates to business eventually because all relationships do eventually lead there.
Yeah, Major Singleton asks, should your
Mm.
race, ethnicity be an integral part of your brand? Before we answer that question, what I will say is this too, is that remember, everybody here represents a really, really small fraction of the market. So think about how many hundreds and thousands of transactions are done on a monthly basis. And
Hmm.
everybody here is just asking for 5 to 10 of them a month. That's it, right? And so the reality of it is that hypothetically, even if you did alienate everybody else, but I only coached golfers, for example. How many golfers are out there? More than enough for me to do my business. So that's just
Hmm.
that's just another perspective and another viewpoint. But what is your take, Kat, and what have you seen about people that say, I'm a, I work in the Spanish community, right? I
Hmm.
work in the Asian community. What's your take on people that do that? Is that just another brand in
Hmm.
itself and we don't have to overthink that?
I think it's a part of the brand. So that's what I would call your positioning, right?
Okay.
Your brand is who you are. It's how do you quantify yourself on paper, right? How do you describe yourself? What's the language? What's the vibe? The colors? All of that. Who you serve is your positioning.
Okay.
So if I were to be an originator, or even if I were to be a brand strategist, right? Like let's just play make believe here. I would want to serve and feel most qualified to serve the people that I have the most in common with, because I'm going to feel that connection. And I'm going to know that if I could solve the problem for myself, I can definitely solve it for you. And
Right.
that's going to be a great starting point. And I would say to your question, Major, of should your race or ethnicity be a part of your brand? I think if it is a part of your story, it absolutely needs to be a part of your brand because it will strengthen your brand. The story is the connective tissue with which you can reach out and say, hey, Kai, we can connect on this because you and I have this in common. Or, hey, Heather, you and I both, went to nursing school and you graduated and that's incredible. I dropped out because it wasn't for me. But we
Right.
can still bond over the fact that we went through those shared experiences. And for me, I went to Japan for the first time earlier this year. I brought my whole audience along on that journey. And the culture of Japan and their beliefs and just how they value family and community, that's as much a part of my brand as anything else. So it makes sense for me. But I
Right.
would say if it's influenced your story, include it in your brand because it will definitely support you.
But also knowing this, because I think me being Asian and the disciplines that I've learned is a
Hmm.
part of my brand, but it's not necessarily a part of my positioning. So I don't
Hmm.
necessarily coach Asian people only. There's actually a running
Right.
joke because I was having an accountability call and I was coming down hard on people and telling them you have to do this. And somebody said, you know, I always wondered what it would be like to have an Asian father, right? Like a tiger dad. And so I said, yes, because I'm going to bring that part of my heritage to people that don't know what that's about. And so
Hmm.
major, it could be a part of what defines you, but it doesn't necessarily have to be your positioning because my brand, when it comes to transition and change, I have to decide, do I want to work with new originators? Do I want to work with more seasoned originators? Who do I want to help in the transition? Do I want to work in this market or do I want to work in that market? So those are two separate things, right?
Hmm.
Those are two separate things. So let me ask you a question just to just a little bit of a case study. So
Yeah.
when you work with somebody like Ryan or I don't know, anybody else, I mean, Ryan's an interesting one because he goes on TV, right?
Hmm.
But and you think, oh, he's on TV and he has, he's just going to create his brand. But like for example, what's his brand? What did you look at him and say, all right, we're gonna do something with him? Like how do you make somebody else unique? And here's the reason why I say that. I think a lot of people will look at Ryan or they'll look at a lot of people and they'll say, well, their brand is just they're popular. They just have millions of viewers, but he still had to position himself up to that point, right?
Hmm.
And he's Ryan Serhant. It's not like the mortgage nerd. He doesn't have some catchy moniker, but there
Yeah.
is something unique about him. How did you work with him to really position himself from the other stars of the show and everything else?
So when I came into his world, he was on the tail end of filming $1 Million Listing. And I'll be fully candid with everybody on this call, Kai. Like I don't sugarcoat. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
literally have a podcast called Not Nice, Clever.
yeah.
The fact that he was a reality TV star was actually a detractor because I have worked with athletes and notable celebrity individuals in the past when I was living in Miami and involved in various startups. And it was actually a detractor because we talk about values, right? To pick and choose who you want to do business with. And I didn't have a lot in common with people who were constantly seeking fame. Now, when I went through the interview process and I met him, he he was still himself, he was still very genuine, but he shared with me like his vision of what he wanted to do and to reposition and rebrand himself as a CEO and an entrepreneur that has business in real estate, that has brokerages, that has an educational company, that has books, that has audiobooks, that has
You wanted
podcasts.
to move away from the celebrity status a little bit more and get taken seriously. Is that what you're saying?
he he wanted to reposition to be seen as a CEO
Okay.
and not just a real estate broker. Like you introduced him when we first hopped on, $1 million real estate broker, right?
Right.
Which was how he got started. But before that, he was a kid from the Midwest that moved to New York and was trying to be a soap opera or a hand model and was so like young and naive that the only people that he could feel confident enough to approach were pregnant women in Starbucks. And he would ask them, hey, looks like you're going to need more space. Are you renting right now? Can I find you a 3 bedroom, a 4 bedroom? So people go through these iterations. Your brand evolves because you're a human. So if you're a human, you're going to evolve over time. We go through phases. You mentioned a lot of the folks on this call have been in the business 10, 15 years, and you always have the opportunity to innovate and evolve and rebrand yourself. And so Ryan's going through that right now. And you'll notice he no longer has his Big Money Energy podcast. He has his Business of Influence podcast. He's sharing stories about other founders because he wants to be associated and seen as a founder and a CEO, right? There's the whole guilt by association, but also the flip side of it with birds of a feather. And so I would say if anybody's on here, if your brand has felt stale or stagnant, like really start inside because everything's an inside job first and really ask yourself, what what do you value now? What do you want? How do you want it to feel? How do you want it to look? Who do you want to do business with? where do you like actually find joy in that? Because the more joy and the more energy, the more money you're going to make. If you're trying to force yourself and be desperate, like desperate doesn't sell. Desperate doesn't sell on Tinder, doesn't sell on Instagram, doesn't sell in business. And so I think really giving yourself that opportunity to ask, because my brand has even gone through a renaissance too. Like several years ago when I was working in marketing, I was the Girl Friday. That was my two-word brand. If any of you guys have seen that old school movie, I'm a sucker for old school movies. And I wanted to say yes to everything and yes to all the clients. And if I didn't know how to do it, I'd figure it out. I was the Girl Friday that would get it done. Now I'm the brand architect and I build,
Yeah.
right? And so that you you get to change your mind at any time. And Brian's like Ryan is in the midst of this transition. The other thing too I'll say is that start now, because rebranding yourself takes time. It's rewiring the brains of all the people who've been with you, right, for years, and how they've known you and how now you want to be known moving forward.
I think that's really good to close. And I told you we'd go fast and furious because we've got Tyler up next. But
Yeah.
rebranding is important. Pre 2020, my brand as a coach was I help higher level originators scale. I was an operations coach. But when the
Mm-hmm.
2020 pandemic came, I had to completely rebrand to a sales marketing specialist to help even beginning originators and
Mm-hmm.
seasoned originators bring business in again. And that was a complete rebranding on my part. So everybody listening right now, you could be rebranding because maybe you were just the lender before, but now you're an educator. You might be rebranding because you have to go to different states. It's like, well, I'm in California, but I have to show people in Texas that I'm a Texan. So what am I going to do to connect with somebody in the Southwest or the Midwest? Or
Mm-hmm.
you may switch to VA, and so you're going to start putting American flags in the background, just like Bruce Berner does, and all the VA people. But so branding is also about rebranding. It's okay. I mean, we have to
Mm-hmm.
rebrand in different markets, and some people are moving to reverse mortgages, and so they have to attract seniors and their kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we've got to close up, and whether the whole thing was complete or not, thank you so much. You gave us a lot of information. If you had to say one thing in closing, in terms of, I don't know, how people got started, or just a thought, what would you say, is somebody's first step or next thought process for branding themselves?
Yeah, I would say that that pitch exercise that I mentioned and that we did at LFG, I can drop it into the chat or maybe we can send it in a recap, but it's
Mhm.
essentially these three questions that can form your brand pitch. So, who are you?
Mhm.
Who do you help? And how do you help them? And treat it like it were a hunk of marble and you're the master and you're going to refine and refine and refine and until that statement, that pitch feels like you. And then the last note that I'll leave you with, because I know we have a lot of high performing, highly competitive, perfectionist driven entrepreneurs on this call, please only compare yourself to who you were yesterday. I don't actually consume a lot of other brand consultant or brand strategist content. I only consume the content of those who are 10 to 15 years ahead of me because that's where I want to go.
Right.
I'm not looking at the people that are around me in my journey because my only competition is who I was yesterday. So I know like holidays, we've got a lot of time indoors. Like if you're not living in sunny California, it's very cold. Just don't fall victim to comparisonitis.
Yeah.
Really just go inward, focus on you.
But thank you so much, Kat, and Kat will be back. It was a pleasure, Kat. Thank you.
Thank you. Likewise, Kai.